I'm William Andreessen, host of Speaking with Students, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows in the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
The Clark County Public Schools, Virginia, is seeking a superintendent beginning August 1st, 2024. Located in Berryville, Virginia, just south of Winchester, Clark County Public Schools serves 1,924 students in their 4 accredited schools: Boyce and D.G. Cooley Elementary Schools, Johnson Williams Middle School, and a new Clark County High School. The district's manageable size promotes visibility, inclusion, relationships, and transparency. The firm of Hazard, Young, and Attia, HYA, is conducting the search, and leading the search are associates Drs. Sam DePaul and Daryl Williams. They can be reached at samuel.depaul@hyasearch.com and daryl.williams@hyasearch.com. Visit the Clark County Public Schools website at clark.k12.va.us for more information about the district, and also visit HYA's website, hyasearch.com. Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Jennifer Serravallo. She is a New York Times bestselling author. She helps teachers with literacy instruction. That's right. Our talk today is focused on her book, Teaching Reading Across the Day, Methods and Structures for Engaging Explicit Instruction. What a powerful book. Awesome. So much to learn, use, and share. You're going to love this conversation. Thanks for listening. Oh, by the way, could you take a minute and help out the podcast? And I got a couple of ways that you might consider. One is tell a friend and share the links with them. 2, how about go to my website and leave a review and subscribe? And how about 3, you could click on the link on my website homepage where it says buy me a coffee. By doing that, you could donate $1 or $2 or $5 maybe. What do you think? To help me defray the costs of the podcast. That'd be so cool. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
And it's really, I think that the idea that content teachers are teaching literacy actually does support their goal of helping kids learn more content, because it is proven in research that we can learn from our reading. We can learn from our reading, but only if we're actually understanding what we're reading. So helping kids with the strategies and skills they need to be able to understand better is not only going to help them become stronger readers, but it's going to help them to deepen their content knowledge.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
Jennifer Serravallo is a New York Times bestselling author of more than 15 books and resources, an award-winning educator, a literacy consultant, a frequent speaker at state and national conferences, and a former member of the Parents Magazine editorial board. In 2023, she launched her podcast, To the Classroom, Conversations with Researchers and Educators. Jen is best known for creating books and resources rooted in research that help make responsive, strategic, differentiated literacy instruction possible for all teachers. Her books are used around the world, and several have been translated into French, Chinese, and Spanish, and will soon be available in Italian. Jen holds a BA from Vassar College and an MA from Teachers College, where she has also taught graduate and undergraduate classes. Follow Jen on Twitter at @JSerravallo and Instagram at Jennifer Serravallo. Learn more from her website blog, which is jenniferserravallo.com, and join the Reading and Writing Strategies Facebook community. Today, our focus is her new book, Teaching Reading Across the Day, Methods and Structures for Engaging Explicit Instruction. Jen, thanks so much for joining me on the show again, and say hi to everyone.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Hi, everyone.
Well, glad to have you back, and let's talk a little bit about children and reading before we get into your book. And what I want to ask you is, so what are some of the biggest obstacles to children becoming readers?
Man, you're just starting off with a softball question, huh?
Exactly.
That is like the question. It's the biggest question. And I think that it's such a hard question to answer, because the real answer is it depends. There are so many different things that could be obstacles to students becoming proficient readers, that I think it's critical that teachers become expert diagnosticians of what's going on with each individual, and have strategies and methods and structures to match the instruction to what each individual child needs. Like it could be anything from a child's motivation to read, their executive functioning skills and ability to stay focused during reading. It could be their decoding skills. It could be their comprehension skills. It could be, it could be a whole host of different things. So every teacher, I think, needs a toolbox of different ways to respond to individual learners to really figure out what could be going on here with the student and what do I need to do to best support the student to move forward.
And I appreciate you starting there because I know it's a big question, but yes, and thanks so much for sharing, because there's so many, like you said, there's so many variables to what might cause a child not to be able to read or stand in their way. And but let's go here next. I mean, why should a kid like to read? I mean, why is it important?
Well, I think if we like to do something, we're going to do more of it, right? So if we can help students find the books that they're going to love, become skilled and proficient at reading, and give them opportunities to see how pleasurable reading can be. And what that means for different people is different. For some people, it's about devouring the news every day. That was my grandfather, who didn't finish sixth grade, right? He had an elementary school education, but that man read the newspaper every single day. And that was what reading was for him. And if you asked him if he loved to read, he might think, oh, I don't read like my wife, my grandmother, who read romance novels like by the dozens a day, right? She would say, I love to read. And I'd say, no, Poppy, as I call my grandfather, you're a reader too, right? You read newspapers. He loved the news. He loved being, and oh gosh, if one of the family members ever got in the local newspaper, it was like the biggest joy of his life. I feel like, I love to read. I devour professional books and research. I love reading to stay up to date with everything that's going on. But I'm really looking forward to this summer when I'm going to be reading beach reads on the beach. I promised myself to take a little bit of a breather after churning out all these books and just read some fiction for once. So I think for every reader, my point is every reader can love to read something different, and that's okay. And what reading looks like to each of us can be different. And for some, it might even be that you're reading with your ears and you're listening to audiobooks and podcasts. That's cool too. But if we need to help kids find a way to connect to reading. And when they do find that way to connect, they're going to choose to do it more, and they're just going to get better and better and better at it year over year.
I like that. It's such an interesting aspect. And by the way, I read a lot of nonfiction, a lot of stuff centered around education and leadership and so forth. But I also love my fiction, and and especially books that over time I've discovered the idea of making sure that I complete what an author's done and going back to the beginning and going through, because it's amazing how some of them actually put little goodies in each of them that if you read them out of order, you don't get it. It's that type of thing. Fun. Good stuff. So, all right. So here's just a little question. I mean, just a little simple question. I mean, should all teachers teach reading?
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the themes in the new book is this idea that we all need to be literacy teachers. And by that, I mean the science teacher, the social studies teacher, the first grade teacher, the eighth grade teacher. Everybody needs to look at their responsibility and what literacy looks like in their individual field or their individual subject area, and support students with literacy skills. I think when I talk to content area teachers, a lot of them will say that, yes, they do assign reading. There might be a textbook. They might need to be reading lab reports. There might be, articles that are relevant to the topic that they're studying. But I think sometimes the focus in the content area classroom is more on the content and less on how do I read this, right? What do I do to manage the text features together with the main text? How do I read a primary source document? What do I do when there's vocabulary that I come to that I don't understand? How do I annotate the text that I'm reading? And so there's such power in having responsibility for not just the content that you're hoping students learn from that text, but also providing them with skills, strategies, and hopefully teaching that guides practice to support them as they learn how to read in that subject area.
Yeah, it's awesome because it's been a long time. Way back when I was a history teacher, and I had colleagues then who would say things like, I didn't get into this to teach reading. That's not why. And even today I've heard similar sorts of sentiments, except that it's become more prevalent that this is something you've got to learn. And I think about the things we talk about or do in classes and such, that if a child is not reading and not comprehending words, and I specifically want to, you mentioned the whole thing about you get to a word that you don't understand, what do you do? And if they don't have those skills, they just blow by it, and that's not it's not helpful to them then.
And it's really, I think that the idea that content teachers are teaching literacy actually does support their goal of helping kids learn more content, because it is proven in research that we can learn from our reading. We can learn from our reading, but only if we're actually understanding what we're reading. So helping kids with the strategies and skills they need to be able to understand better is not only going to help them become stronger readers, but it's going to help them to deepen their content knowledge. And that's another thing I talk about throughout this book is it's not just a book about content area literacy. It's really about the structures that we can use in any subject area. And even in ELA, in English language arts, I want teachers in English language arts to be thinking about how do we support kids with content, knowledge, vocabulary, and what is the content that we're trying to teach kids, even when we're reading a fictional story or we're reading a poem. How can we have content, vocabulary, knowledge goals together with what we would traditionally consider literacy goals? So if we all think about those various goals that we have across the day, it's just going to support and enrich students' literacy lives and their content understanding and vocabulary development.
So powerful to understand that, and just to make it part of what you do, to understand why it's important. I think that's this incredible stuff there. And that's one of the things I got to make sure I say this. When you look through your book, the Teaching Reading Across the Day, it definitely is. This is not, this is helpful to everyone if you're working with kids. So
thank you for saying that.
Oh, I love it. The title of your latest book is Teaching Reading Across the Day, Methods and Structures for Engaging Explicit Instruction. So what's engaging explicit instruction? What do you mean?
Great question. So I've been hearing a lot about and reading the research and practitioner-facing books around explicit instruction. I think it's one new buzzword that we're hearing a lot these days. And people may be familiar with some of the work of Hollingsworth, Rosenshine, Archer, and Hughes, who have written a lot about explicit instruction. Each of these authors and researchers have a different set of they call them elements or principles of explicit instruction. And I studied all of them, and I think it's important not only that our instruction is very explicit, that we're clear and procedural, that we leave nothing to chance, we make sure kids understand what's expected of them, but also that our instruction is engaging, which means that kids are really active participants in their learning. So I have in the book 9 elements of engaging explicit instruction. And I think probably I'll talk through them real quickly. And I think probably your listeners would agree that, when these things are in place, it makes the lesson clearer. It makes it more likely that kids are able to go off and do what you're asking of them. And it's more engaging for the students, right? So the first one is that in every lesson, we try to connect existing knowledge to new knowledge. I've heard people talk about how our brains are kind of like Velcro. Like anytime we want to learn something new or introduce something new, it helps to connect, really clearly, explicitly connect for kids. What do you already know that connects to this new information that we need to teach? So we activate prior knowledge maybe before the lesson, but throughout the lesson, we're constantly making connections for kids so that they can attach this new learning in this lesson to what it is that they already know. Many people are familiar with the next principle or the next element, which is using a gradual release of responsibility, right? So that we have opportunities to share, model, describe, explain, unpack things for kids, but then we also guide their practice. They have opportunities to try it with us there to give them feedback and support. And then we release the responsibility over them to them to do it independently. The third one is going to come as no surprise to people who know my work really well, which is to break down concepts into clear steps and clear strategies. I write a lot about strategies. People are probably familiar with my reading strategies books, my writing strategies book. And my definition of a strategy is an explicit, clear, step-by-step how-to make sure that we're being really procedural. First do this, then do this, then do this. Not only so kids can understand what we're modeling, but also so that they can go back with independence and continue to try it on their own. Related to the gradual release and the strategy instruction, the next element is that we offer really clear demonstrations, models, explanations, and/or instructions. This is just about clarity of instruction. So there's not confusion over why we're showing something or what kids are supposed to be paying attention to as we demonstrate. And I think this goes hand in hand with the strategy. So I often talk to people about how when I'm demonstrating something, I'm not just showing a perfect example. I'm going to say, here's how I'm going to do it. Watch for these steps. And then I walk through and model those different steps. The next one is making sure that throughout the lesson, we have opportunities for kids to be actively engaged, and that the teacher, through the student's active engagement, is checking for understanding. So if the kids are kind of passively there just watching the teacher do the work, we can't really see whether or not it's sticking. But if we get them actively engaged, we can monitor how they're doing. We can think about, for example, how does the work that they're sharing with us align to a skill progression, and where is it according to what our eventual goal is for what we're trying to do in this lesson. The next is that we want to make sure we give clear feedback that's tied to the strategy, that's tied to the goal, that's aligned to the objective of the lesson, and that feedback offers kids sort of a vision for what's next and nudges them along that progression. We want to, of course, next one, provide scaffolds when tasks are difficult. So we want to give kids the right amount of support, but not too much that we take away the opportunity for them to be actively engaged and do the work. Along with that, differentiating to meet students' needs, making sure that we recognize the differences in the class and we provide the amount of support that each child needs to meet the standard that we're setting for that lesson. And then the last one is student collaboration and independent practice, right? This kind of goes along with them making sure that they're actively engaged, and that active engagement could be turning and talking to a neighbor, stopping and jotting quickly in their notebook. It could be them holding up a thumb or jotting something on a whiteboard and holding it up above their head, but that they're constantly practicing, and that they have an opportunity to chat with peers, to work things out. And again, that's an opportunity for teachers to monitor, to check in, to give feedback, and to check for understanding.
That's awesome. One of the things that, and with all those sections that are there, one of the things that you also include with your book is a whole section of online video resources, as well as other templates and so forth. Can you talk to that just a little bit?
Yeah, so the way the book is set up is that I've got 2 introductory chapters, one about what reading is, and then one about what explicit instruction is, which is what we just talked about. And then the remaining 9 chapters of the book each focus on one lesson structure. So lesson structures that might be really familiar to people, like read aloud lessons, for example, or phonics and spelling lessons, or close reading, or shared reading, reader's theater, conversation. And then within each of those chapters, I show how you can use the same overall structure to teach really young kids. So I've got videos of kindergarten, first grade, older kids, 5th graders, 6th graders, how you can teach in a science classroom. So I've got videos of me teaching in science, teaching in social studies, teaching in ELA classrooms. So I really conceptualize this book being built around this video content, that the chapter serves as a way to kind of set you up to be ready to watch this with a lot of background information and a lot of knowledge about how did I plan this lesson? What decisions am I making as a teacher? And then you get to see it. So here's me actually teaching. And then I also include annotated lesson plans. So you can see my lesson plan, and then you can see my decision making, why I deviated from the lesson plan when I did, right? So, I noticed here the kids weren't really that engaged, so I picked up the pace, or this part I cut out because we ran out of time, or I had to go back and do another demonstration because I could tell they weren't getting it. So I wanted to show, how I make adaptations and how I respond to kids in the moment and deviate from my plan. And this is another kind of theme throughout the book, is the importance of course, having really clear plans, having really clear goals and objectives for your lesson, but making sure that we're always being responsive to the students in front of us. And while we're talking about the videos, I want to mention that these are also super real life videos. I have learned from all my years working with teachers that teachers appreciate this. They are, hand to God, I promise, not edited. They're edited because they've got 2 cameras. So we had to merge the cameras together, but I didn't cut anything out. I didn't do retakes. I shot everything in one take. These are real videos, the good, the bad, the ugly, right? They're really great examples of each lesson type, but they're examples also of what happens in a real classroom. So when I ask a question and nobody answers me, I get, blank stares back. What do I do? Right. And then I show you what I do. And then I annotate my lesson plan to explain why I did what I did. I think it's these kind of micro interactions and these in the moment decisions that teachers need to make that are critical to the effectiveness of the lesson. So I really wanted to kind of unpack that, show it, and tell it in this book.
That's, I love it because that's the realness of it. And then you show how you, like you just said, how you deal with it, because something that's perfect. And I used to teach a class on classroom management, and I would use some really cool professionally made videos from this organization that I shall not name, but a very national organization, where they had staged these events in a classroom, and they actually showed some things not to do, not their intent though. That was not what they were trying to do. And so you could tell it was staged, but it was perfect for using as an example of, here's the problem with this, and let me explain what if this happens. And I think that's what's cool about you doing that with your videos, is that you have the ability to share with someone. They see you as a teacher.
I am a teacher. I mean, I haven't had my own classroom for quite some time, but I am in classrooms with teachers and students regularly, and I will never stop seeing myself as a teacher first and foremost. So I hope that comes through in the videos.
That's awesome, and I think it does, very much so. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the specifics out of your book. One of the things that I love is in each chapter, after the opening, you have a section called an overview. And it always begins somewhere right there, just after that statement of an overview, what research says, or something similar to that. What role does research play in the content of teaching reading across the day? Because obviously you make sure that it's stated.
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked with a research assistant on this project, as I did when I was revising my reading strategies book to be the Reading Strategies Book 2.0. That one has over 700 studies to peer-reviewed literature. This new book has over 300 links to studies to peer-reviewed literature. Wow. I think we're in a moment right now in education where there is a real emphasis on evidence-based instruction or research-based instruction to make sure that when we advocate for certain practices, they have their best chance of working, right? That there have been studies done that have shown with statistical significance that this particular practice works for a majority of students. I think this is a great thing, in education, that we're paying attention to the research literature. And I wanted to make it easier for teachers to know the research foundations on which every suggestion in this book is based. That said, I also say in this book that teacher experience is critical, and that there will always be students that are outside the statistically significant norm that the studies have found, right? Like when a study shows something works, it doesn't mean it always will work for everybody. It means it works for a statistically significant portion of kids. So it's likely to work for most, but we still always have to keep our eyes open, and we have to trust our judgment, and we have to be ready to adapt and modify. So while I include this repeated feature, what research says, there's sometimes 1 to 2 full pages of like a lit review basically on this particular practice in every single chapter. I also unpack in every chapter, these are the kinds of things to watch for. These are the kinds of decisions you might make. These are the kinds of elements to be considering. So I think it's a both and situation. I think research is critical and teacher knowledge is critical.
That's awesome. One of the things that is apparent in your book is that it's very practical, and it's meant to provide tools. And I'm going to use that analogy to kind of move forward with this, to say that, it seems to me that one of the things that you focus on here is the idea that the teacher needs to develop this toolbox, this this way of doing things that becomes part of what they do. And so, I mean, what do you think about this? Should teachers have a small repertoire of lesson structures, to help them teach reading?
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the other themes in this book is this idea that if you know these 9 structures, you're set. I don't care if you're a first grade teacher, an 8th grade teacher, a science teacher, an ELA teacher, like these are literally the only 9 lesson types that I go to again and again and again. So they all have a structure, they have a pacing, they have a way that you plan for them, they have predictable ways you can teach responsively within them. And I find that I just return to them again and again. These lesson structures can be whole class lessons. Like one of the things I talk about in the book is a focus lesson where I'm explicitly teaching a strategy and giving kids guided practice. Like one of the videos in the lesson, one of the videos in this chapter is me teaching a group of kids in a 4th grade science classroom how to annotate an article that they've been assigned to read, right? So like we want kids to annotate, but have they ever been taught how to annotate? So I pull a lesson, pull them together for a lesson and I show them how I chunk the text, I read a portion, I jot in the margin, and my jot could be a word, a phrase, it could be a picture, a quick sketch, but I want to make sure I capture the main information of that paragraph, and then I can go back and look across my notes to summarize what the whole article is mostly about. So that's an example of a whole class focus lesson. But I also show a video of me doing a small group focus lesson. I think the video I have is with a couple of kids learning to be more fluent as readers, and I draw their attention to ending punctuation and how that can inform their intonation and expression. So I give them a little quick explanation, a little quick demonstration, and then set them off to start reading and give them guided practice and support. But you can also do this one-on-one. So you can sit next to a student one-on-one and coach them. I'm trying to remember the video of this one. I think this one's a 5th grade social studies, and I was teaching the student, I think it was a summarization strategy, and to help him use the headings in the piece he was reading to summarize the key information from the article, right? So this idea that these lessons, but they all kind of go the same way, whether it's whole class, small group, or one-on-one, the bones of the lesson are the same. The moves are very similar. And so that's what I try to unpack for people within each of the chapters. But yes, in science and social studies and ELA, these just work. They work again and again and again. And once I have the structure set, I find it so freeing because it makes it easier to plan. It makes it easier to, it's less like cognitive load on the teacher to like, what was I going to do next? Like you have this, this rhythm for how your lessons go. And it allows me to be more innovative within the lesson, more responsive. I can watch the kids because my attention's freed up a little bit because the procedures are really become second nature.
That's excellent. All right. So one of the things that, some adults might decide that they might worry that it's too childish or that once they get old enough, it's not necessary anymore. What do you think about? Is there importance in reading aloud lessons to, especially maybe upper elementary and grade 7 and 8? Is there a reason why you need to make sure that's part of what you do?
Yeah. So the read aloud lesson that I talk about in this book is not the same as like the story time lesson. You come in from recess and sit on the floor and just like with the lights dimmed and listen to a story. Although those are great too. I think you should keep those, whenever you can. The kind of lesson I talk about in this book, one of the chapters is on a read aloud lesson, which is really an intentional teaching intentional teaching structure that allows teachers to model strategies, teach content and vocabulary, and give kids opportunities to be actively engaged with the text. And it's one of, I think, across the book, there's like really 3 lesson types that help kids access grade level texts. Read aloud is one, close reading is another, and shared reading is a third. And read aloud, I think, when you have students who maybe can't access grade level text, could be one way that you help them grapple with the complexities of that text and gain content knowledge from that text. It also supports their listening skills, and it also can be a great way to build community and springboard them into conversation. So no, I don't think it's babyish at all. I think it could be really intentional, and I think it could belong in upper elementary, middle school content or ELA classrooms.
It's so important. I think that that type of modeling and those interactions, that if they don't happen, it just becomes something that doesn't matter, and they don't hear the way the way an adult might use their voice or say things, and I think that's so important. I love that section where you're talking about those activities. This is going to lead me to my next one, which something that's near and dear to my heart is vocabulary. And you have a section on vocabulary, and I have to say this because, now, yes, there was dirt and electricity when I was at elementary school, but something that was big during those days was lists. All right, you memorize these lists. I remember very well memorizing the lists, and there's some words that are stuck in my memory forever because I memorized them in time for the test, and so some reason I have a couple words that just the memory of memorizing them is stuck there. You're not talking about lists. Let's talk a little bit about vocabulary lessons and why the teachers should look to incorporate this in what they do, and especially the idea of, instead of memorizing lists, more of an exploration of what vocabulary is.
Yeah, you know why that memorizing list didn't work? It's because we have research that shows that in order to learn new words, one, you need to have context. You need to really understand the way in which that word can be used. You need to ideally encounter it within the context. It could be the context of a story. It could be the context of like a lived experience. Like Tanya Wright talks about, when she's gardening, she learns words about gardening, like the tools that you use or the kinds of plants that you're planting. You're motivated to learn it, and it makes sense to you because it's within the context of an actual experience. The other reason that just memorizing lists, my ninth grade daughter actually has they have a vocabulary program where they have 20 words a week, and they're just completely random. They don't connect to anything or anyone. They don't connect to a context in the text that they're reading, and they don't connect to each other. What research has shown is that we need to build conceptual networks, that vocabulary learning is dependent upon connecting this word to other words. So there's a couple of things in this book that support that vocabulary development, which is critical for comprehension and critical to supporting kids, knowledge building. They're really hand in hand. So one is that in every single chapter across the book, so the close reading chapter, the shared reading chapter, the read aloud chapter, I have a repeated structure that says vocabulary and knowledge building within blank lesson, right? So I give advice for how you should be thinking about incorporating vocabulary and knowledge building goals within that particular lesson. So it's everything from, highlighting tier 2 words in a read aloud and making sure you have plans for how you're going to either tuck in a definition as you teach it or as you read the text, or lead kids to figure out that meaning from the context in the story, to things like when you're doing a phonics lesson and you might have a list of words that fit a particular spelling pattern. If it's a word that you think kids might not know, that you spend time talking about the meaning of the word, not just how to spell that word, right? So things like that, tips like that across the entire book. And then, as you mentioned, I have an entire chapter just on vocabulary lessons. And these explicit vocabulary lessons really lean on that research about the importance of context and the importance of connection building for kids to learn words. I mentioned already Tanya Wright's research. Freddie Hebert is another person I lean on a lot. And of course, Becca McCowan, who wrote the fantastic book, Bringing Words to Life. So the way the vocabulary lesson goes is you take a word that I call a focus word, a word that kids have encountered previously in a text that you've read with them, in an experience, like a science experiment that you've done with them, whatever the case may be. And then you spend some time deeply processing that word. So you help the kids understand synonyms and antonyms for that word, that if there's multiple meanings, what those different multiple meanings are, the part of speech of that word, the way the word can be used. You might ask them yes and no questions. Could this word, fit here? Could it fit there? You ask them to generate new sentences in which that word will work well. So they really understand that word well. That's the beginning of the lesson. And then you move into the network building. So you could be connecting it conceptually. So you might make a concept map of how this word connects to other concepts in your unit. Or you might connect morphologically. So this word has these roots or bases or prefixes or suffixes. And how does this connect to other words we know that are similar? So one of the lesson videos that's included in this chapter is me working with a group of 6th grade students in science that are in a unit on mixtures and solution, or no, 5th grade, I think, mixtures and solutions. And we're exploring the SOLU beginning of the word, solvent, solution. We talk about solutions in math. We talk about solutions in ELA, like when you have a problem and solution in a story. We talk about how a solution in science is different. And why would the beginning of SOLV, solvent, relate to SOLU, solution? What does that SOLU beginning mean? And right, and how does it help you understand those words? So that's an example of I'm building connections between that one word and other words to help cement that word learning. So down with the random lists of words. We need to build connections and we need to help develop context if we want kids to learn these new words.
It's just so important. I mean, as a former history teacher, I read lots of history, but not just history. I read lots of all over the planet. And when we talk about fiction works as well, I mean, one of my favorite authors, and unfortunately he passed, is Tom Clancy. And when he wrote, the stories that he wrote were filled with SAT words. It was amazing how many of these words you could see on these standardized tests and such. And I'm pretty sure he didn't sit there with a list of them crying, oh, I think I'll include this one now, or I'll include this one. The same with, I'm very focused on 2 writers who, their names are Preston and Child, and they write some thriller books, and those are the ones that I'm catching up on. I think I'm up into 2015 now with one of their books. But the point is that they use medical terminology, and they throw in different words from science and such to make the reality of, make it seem that much more real about what they're talking about. And I find myself needing to go, okay, what's that word mean? Not heard that one. And, and it's so important in the role that it plays, these connections with, where you see other words that might be similar to that, where you could figure it out, I guess is my point, or at least come close. And, I'm a big fan of, once again, he's passed, but Michael Crichton and his original Jurassic Park, and there are other books that I've read by him because he had a background in medical, and he'd use a lot of that to make you go, wow, this seems really, really real. And, but you'd have to figure out those words. Otherwise, if you just blow on by them, you kind of miss parts of the story or the feeling that it might be real. And, it's pretty cool. And we seem to have another round of emphasis on dinosaurs again happening. So anyway.
Yeah. I mean, and something else you're talking about is this curiosity that you have about words. Like you want to go look it up. Like you want to know what these words mean because it's important to the story, or you're just curious, like, these words kind of have the same beginning. I wonder if there's something to that, or same base or the same root. I wonder if there's something to that. And I think that doing these lessons, and they're short, 10 minutes, like really short lessons. It starts to just develop this awareness and this curiosity in students, so that hopefully when they're reading and encountering words on their own, they also take some time to think or look it up or talk to someone about the words in their books. My youngest daughter is reading, actually now it's embarrassing, but she's reading the Twilight series. She's in a little bit of a reading slump. There's just not enough books for this age group, like 11, 12, 13-year-olds. I just feel like there's this chasm between like the early elementary chapter books and then like YA that's a little bit, I don't know, a little spicy for that age.
Understand.
and so I was like, well, she's, I was looking at the kinds of shows that she was interested in watching with like teen drama and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, maybe I should show her the Twilight books. And she's like devouring them. But she's the kind of reader that's super word curious. So anytime she gets to a word she doesn't know, she asks me, what does this word mean? I'm like, well, it could mean this or it could mean that. Which one fits the context? And then she figures it out. And she's like, oh, okay, thank you. And she'll remember it for the next time. And like, what an amazing vocabulary building experience, just because she cares to know and she doesn't just breeze past it. Right. So we want that, just like you, just like my daughter, right? We want that for all of our readers.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's just, I read a lot of books. Not the Twilight series. Not read that one. I know what it's about.
I'm actually surprised that there are some like really great vocabulary words in the Twilight series, because it's a little bit like beach read in my opinion. But yeah, she's loving it. So
that's cool. What I was going to say is that some of those writers, one of the things, and by the way, I learned a huge lesson too, that YA does get a little spicy, especially. I have to kind of be careful when I'm talking about it for the show, because I'm like, YA, what's, and then I read the book and you go, whoa, okay, time out. But we got with some authors, they use real words and sometimes they make up words. And so if you don't look it up, it looks like it could be real. And otherwise you might start believing that every word is real, unless you find out that they've created their own vocabulary too, which is it's interesting. So, and some of them just throw that in there and it's like, nice. But anyway, it inspires that curiosity. But I love what you focus on in your book about the vocabulary. So it's kind of a personal, thing of my own, that I like to focus on that. And I like the fact when teachers are learning new strategies to not bore kids into tomorrow type thing. I instead get them excited about trying to figure out the words. So
exactly. Yeah.
Which leads me to this. I want to ask you this. And a lot of times when I ask authors this question, they tell me, oh, I can't do that. But do you have like a favorite topics or topic that is part of your book here that, or that you're focused on that you could share with everybody?
Ooh, a favorite. Well, I mean, maybe something that I do really love, that the way that I integrated the video together with the text, like, and how they work together to kind of show and tell. I really like that about it. And I also like that in a book that's so much about lesson structures, the chapters are very structured. So every chapter you'll find a repeated structure that starts off with a classroom vignette. That's a story of a lesson that's annotated to understand the moves for that lesson type, the overview, as you mentioned, steps for planning, the research, the responsive teaching moves, the video example. So I was very intentional in creating a repeated structure to kind of cleverly show how a structure helps you, because it frees you up to learn the content. And that's one of the messages in the book, is that the structure frees you up. And the structure when you're reading the book and the structure when you're planning a lesson, structure can be really freeing. So I guess my favorite thing is like a little crafty writing move and writing choice that I made to try to send that message both literally and a little bit more subtly and figuratively.
Love it. That's awesome. And thank you for choosing something. I like that. That's cool. All right. So we're getting ready to finish up. And so where can listeners go to connect, buy a book, learn more information?
So as you mentioned in the intro, I invite people to go to my website, jenniferserravallo.com, and you can sign up for my newsletter. I'm very active in the Reading and Writing Strategies Facebook community. I answer questions there every day, pretty much, and post announcements there. And you can follow me on social media. If you're interested in this book, you can order it from Corwin, which is my publisher, or you can order it from really wherever you get your books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever. So I hope people are interested in checking it out. You can also read a sample on Corwin.com. Just search Teaching Reading Across the Day and you can find it.
Excellent. And I'll put that information in the show notes so that they can easily click and go, which is cool. Jen, thank you so much for sharing your latest book, Teaching Reading Across the Day, Methods and Structures for Engaging Explicit Instruction. Great conversation. Awesome focus. I love it. Wishing you the best in all you do.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.